gentlemen, boys and girls, and this presentation is about post-war immigration. But today we are only dealing with the West Indian migration to Britain. And this is by myself, Jordan Anderson, Durrell Riley and Kareem Taylor. Long before the Africans came and dwelt in the West Indian lands, there was a nation which were called the Arawak and the Carib Indians. And after a while, it was some of the European countries like the Portuguese, the Spanish, the Dutch and also the British. And it was the Dutch which introduced sugar first to Barbados from Brazil. And they started growing sugarcane, extracting sugar and making rum, which was a lot of hard work. So they decided to enslave these native Indians. And instead of not just enslaving them, but they also physically and sexually abused them. And through that they got sexually transmitted diseases and also influenza, which made them die in thousands. And they only had little resistance from these diseases, and they could not cope with the hard work. Why could they not cope with the hard work? The reason was that because their diet was fish and vegetables mainly. And long before the European people came, they were only doing a little farming, doing a little fishing, doing a little hunting, and they didn't have much work to do because they were living off the land. So when the Europeans realized that they were dying in thousands, they turned to Africa for labor. And they discovered that the African man is much stronger and they have better resistance against these diseases, and they could cope with the harsh conditions and climates. So they decided to bring over the African people in thousands into the Caribbean islands. That's why today you can see the African faces in the Caribbean islands is very popular.
The First World War started from 1914 to 1918. Many West Indians, including Jamaicans, came and fought in the war and were welcomed and placed in the front line in the hardest part of the battle and as RAF as ground crews. After the First World War, some Jamaicans stayed and some returned home. The Jamaicans that did stay stayed on a very small scale compared to World War II. And World War II started from 1939 to 1945. And again, the British colony called these countries to come and fight. And thousands came and fought in the war. And after, some decided to stay in England, but some decided to return home. The war was a crucially important factor for post-war immigration. Large numbers of people were uprooted from their countries and mainly from the European countries and the empire. Colonial men were serving abroad and had their horizons widened, and some saw opportunities for work in Europe. Now I'm going to talk about the mother country and the Commonwealth. England had colonized many countries, including Australia, Canada and Kenya, but mainly it had colonized the West Indian countries such as St. Vincent, Jamaica and Barbados, and these countries were called the Commonwealth. Now I'm going to talk about the New Horizons. The soldiers that did come had fought in France, Italy and Germany and so forth. Therefore, they have broadened their horizons and decided to stay in these countries.
Britain persuaded some Jamaicans and some of the West Indians to return home after the Second World War. And when the Jamaicans returned home, they found out that there was a large scale of unemployment in Jamaica, which means that they didn't find many jobs for them to work in their homeland. So with their army wages, they went back in empty troop ships all the way back to Britain because there was a shortage of labour in Britain. The reason why there was a shortage of labour in Britain because many men died during the war, and also they needed to build back Britain's economy and also the buildings which were bombed during the war. The housing which the Jamaicans found. Well, the Jamaicans found it hard to get housing from the white landlords and the white landladies. And also, they found it hard to get housing from the better areas because they didn't have much money. So they would only get housing in mostly the poorer inner areas of the city, like the poorer areas of Cardiff, the poorer areas of London, and also the poorer areas of Liverpool. And the Jamaicans would mainly would rent houses from mainly the Irish and the Jewish. There's a perfect example of a man basically elucidating the fact that he was looking for a house in Britain, and he was talking to a white landlady on the phone, and yes, the price was good and everything, but as soon as he explicitates the fact that he is black, then the white landlady said, didn't give him the house, so he got rejected. So the Jamaicans found it hard to get housing from the white landladies and the white landlords because there was a lot of racism during them times. Last of all, the types of jobs which were available. Well, there was the post-rental service, transport, and also working in hospitals and etc. But one of the things they could not work as or work in was the police.
The immigration from the West Indies was encouraged by the British Nationality Act of 1948, where it allowed citizens of the Commonwealth to enter Britain freely. The West Indians were the first group of non-white immigrants to settle in Britain in large numbers. After the World War II, many of the West Indians came to Britain, and they were ill-prepared and naive, because when they came to Britain, they thought the mother country was going to be a good place for them to live, to build up their money and to raise their children, but they faced resentment and harsh treatment towards them. During the early years of the large-scale immigration, the attitudes and misconceptions developed between the police and the West Indians grew, and this resulted to mutual stereotypes. The West Indians came to Britain for many different reasons, some for jobs, some to seek better opportunities, and some to build a life for their children. Britain was short of workers to run the transport system and postal service and hospitals, because many nurses from Jamaica were the best nurses in the world, so they wanted them to come over to Britain to work in the hospitals. The police force alienated themselves from the West Indian community and did not allow them to join after the war, as the force was more institutionally racist then than it is today. When black people reported race crimes to the police, they found the response was inadequate to the response they would have to a white person. And when the West Indian community leaders offered help to make the police racially aware, the police turned it down. This led, as well, there was racial abuse, which the West Indians had been invited to the mother country to fight the war. So they felt it was their home too, because they had fought alongside the British troops. To be discriminated against, they were shocked and horrified, and some returned to the West Indies, but many stayed here despite the difficulties they faced. Due to all this racial abuse and harsh treatment, this led to the racial disturbances in 1958. The two of them were the Notting Hill riots and the St. Anne riots. But the St. Anne riots were not as famous, publicised as the Notting Hill riots, so I'm only going to cover the Notting Hill riots. The Notting Hill riots started on the 30th of August when a white Swedish woman called Margaret Morissette was arguing with her Jamaican husband called Raymond at Lattimore tube station. As this happened, a group of white people walked past and they seen what was happening, so they started shouting racial abuse towards Raymond. And when Miss Morrison didn't back them up in what they were doing, they became infuriated. So the next night, when they seen her at a bar, they smashed her with bricks, wood, bottles, and it also escalated to where she got smashed in the back with a metal pole. And it only stopped when the police intervened and had to escort her home. Miss Morrison wrote her account on this in a book called Jungle West 11, where it recounted the events that happened that night. Also that night, 300 to 400 white people, including teddy boys, went around to the West Indian people's homes in Lattimore Road and attacked them. From the 30th of August to the 5th of September, this went on, and it only finished when the police had to gather and arrest 140 people. Only 108 people were charged with offences, from rioting, carrying weapons. And out of these people, 72 people were white and 36 of them were black. Since the 1960s, the British government has developed and introduced laws of legislation where it made it an offence to discriminate against somebody due to their race.